Hello and welcome. This is Polly Mertens, and I am the founder of Get Busy Thriving. I'm an eating disorder and life coach who has recovered from bulimia after 20 years, and I've had lasting recovery for over 10 years. And my mission with this call and with my website is to help people who are interested in thriving in their lives to stop being bulimic and to find their path to lasting recovery. And I'm excited. I'm joined in conversation today by Kathryn Hansen, who's the author of my favorite book on recovery, Brain Over Binge. Welcome, Kathryn.
Hi, Polly. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I'm glad you're here, and thank you for joining me today. I think it's going to be a wonderful conversation. Really, what we're trying to do here is share a lot about what you convey in the books that you've created, and I want to thank you to anyone who's joining this call to listen in, and I acknowledge you for being in action, for being proactive and looking for ideas and insights like we will share. Kathryn has great ideas that she shares in her books and in my website and my blog and my coaching. We really try and work in harmony to help people have lasting recovery in their lives. And I know that people out there and whoever's listening to this wants to have a life that they love and enjoy, and really having bulimia in it or binging and purging or just binge eating disorder is not healthy for anyone. Anyone who's out there who wants recovery, we're hoping to share some insights into how to get that and from our experience. So today's topic is called Simple Insights into Successful Bulimia Recovery. And while recovery isn't always an easy road, our purpose for sharing this time with you is to help you simplify a lot of information out there, and to help people prepare for that road, but not be burdened by too much information or out-of-date information. And Kathryn's really done a lot of great research into this, and she's going to share a lot about what she's learned and what we both learned from both being bulimics and having recovered, and then going on in our lives to help other people through you and your being an author and sharing your book and being in my blog and podcasts and web videos that we've done. So the ideas and opinions Kathryn and I will be sharing are our own, and Kathryn, I've heard you say that your approach to recovery is an alternative to more traditional therapy methods out there, would you say?
Yes, absolutely. And no one thing is going to work for everyone. So just from whatever this call, take what applies to you, take what resonates with you, and apply it in your life. And if something doesn't, then that's okay.
Totally. Well said. And if I can share my intentions for having Kathryn join me in this conversation, the purpose of this call for me is to offer anyone listening hope, to provide a ray of light and hope to anyone who is still binging and wants to stop. My second goal is to share, both of us to share insights and ideas from our experience, what we've learned over time, what we learned having been bulimics, and things that we've tried that have and haven't worked, but I think you do a wonderful job of simplifying that. So our goal here is the same, and that's to share ideas and insights. And lastly, I want to create an invitation to you, if you're listening to this, to make a decision and take some action. Please, we are spending time together today because we want you to get the results that you want in your life, and you can't get that without taking some action. So those are our three goals for today, or my three goals for today, and I invite you to listen carefully to this conversation so that the gem, the pearls, the wisdom that you are here to get and take away with you will help you transform your life. So listen carefully and maybe take some notes as well. Quick background story, how I came to know Kathryn is I was actually told about her book, Brain Over Binge, by one of my coaching clients. This was, about 3 years ago, and I ordered the book on Amazon. I picked it up, got it just in time for a flight that I was taking across the country, and by the time I had gotten off, I started reading it on the plane. By the time I got off the plane at my transfer point, I was already blogging about it. I was so excited. I think either that day or that week, I reached out to you, Kathryn, and I was like, I just want you to know I love this book, and I wrote a review, and I just was so excited about it. And we did a podcast a couple years ago, I think it was now, and you've come out with your new book, which I'm so excited for you to talk about and share some of those insights. It's called The Brain Over Binge Recovery Guide. And I was so excited to get my hands on a copy of it. And I invited Kathryn to join me today to have a conversation about her book and ways for us to share from our experience, the insights, the simple things, and just hearing our voice as people who've been in recovery. I think we actually recovered the same year, 2005, right?
Yes, 2005. So it's almost 11 years.
I know, almost 11 years for both of us. So
yeah, around summer will be 11 years for me. So.
Same, May of 2005 for me. So,
wow,
right on.
Me too. That's amazing.
Right on. So, Kathryn, before we go into some detail, because I love this new guide that you've come out with. I mean, it's very comprehensive, but it's easy to follow, and there's so many great tools and techniques, and I want to share some of that in just a minute. But, tell people, why did you write this new book? And for someone who's just learning about you or all of your books, how are the two different, and where should they start?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've had people ask me that, and Bring Up Binge really was my story. I mean, it has some self-help elements in order to try to point people in a new direction, but ultimately it's my story. It's what happened to me. It goes through my days of bulimia, my unsuccessful therapy, and then how I eventually recovered, all told in terms of me. And this new book is really reaching out to others and helping them learn to apply. It's based on the same concepts as Bring Up Binge, but helping other people apply these concepts in their own lives. And this is really based on what I've learned over the years since writing Bring Up Binge. I mean, I've learned so much just from people who have contacted me and I've talked to, and coaches like you who contact me, and we just learn what works best for people and what helps people. So that's really what I'm trying to share in this book. It has a workbook element to it, which makes it a lot thicker than it really is, because there's a lot of blank space for writing and for getting your own insights and really just seeing how these concepts are going to apply in your own life. So that's really the difference. And as far as where to start, I mean, the second book, The Recovery Guide, is written so that you can read it without reading the first book. But I always recommend for people to read the first book, because I think it really helps to see these concepts applied in real life, and to really understand how I came to believe this and how it worked. And then the Recovery Guide just to sort of help you along in your own journey.
Absolutely. And what I'd love for you to share a little bit on, and what just really jumped out at me, I've probably read 25 books, all sorts of theories from, habits and eating disorder specific or whatnot, in this area. And your message was so loud and clear to me, and it really paralleled a lot that I was learning about, let's call it the way that the mind works, reprogramming or rewiring, how habits are formed, things like that. So let's assume that, some people on this call are, haven't read either of your books. I just want you to tell them a little bit about the insights you discovered. You did a lot of research. Well, you read a great book, that helped you, and then you did research in addition that helped you write your first book about how the brain works and how, bulimia isn't a disease. It's not like people are broken or, they're born with this, right? Can you explain just a little bit of that so we can give them the foundation of what you share in the book?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a big topic, so I'll do my best to kind of pare it down. But the main thing I learned that really helped me recover was that I was healthy, like you just mentioned, like that my brain was healthy and I was healthy. And this wasn't the message I was getting in therapy, because I was in therapy for a long time. And I really learned that I was flawed. I learned that my personality needed changing, and I needed to somehow kind of transform my life and learn how to cope better and I basically learned all the ways I was wrong. And not that that was my fault or anything, but I spent a lot of time trying to solve my other problems in order to maybe stop my bulimia. And the whole thing just kind of was complicated. It didn't make a lot of sense. I tried my best. It didn't work for me. That doesn't mean it doesn't work for other people. That's fine. But really just viewed it as a disease, like you said. And I found this book in May of 2005 called Rational Recovery by Jack Trimpey, and it really explained, it was for alcoholics and drug addicts, not bulimics, but I found so many parallels to my own problem. And it explained addictions in terms of the brain, but in terms of a healthy brain, that addictions are sort of an adaptive response to when the primitive part of our brain becomes actually conditioned to believe that the addiction, alcohol, drugs, binge eating, are actually physically necessary for survival. And they're not, but your brain becomes conditioned, the lower primitive part of the brain becomes conditioned as if it is, and it drives you toward this behavior as if it is vital and necessary for survival. And anybody who's ever experienced a binge urge knows that it just makes sense. Like, you feel like you absolutely have no choice but to follow this urge and to do this thing that you know is wrong. And I couldn't really explain that, and my therapist tried to in these emotional ways, but this theory really made a lot of sense to me because it explained that the urges were coming from a primitive part of my brain that wasn't actually me. It wasn't actually a part of who I believe myself to be. And this is why I always felt like I was hijacked by these urges. They always felt like they were coming from someone else, and I was like watching myself, and it was just really strange. But the author of this book explained that you basically have two brains. You have your human brain, which I call the higher brain in my books, and you have your primitive brain, which I call the lower brain. And these two are kind of, they're not competing, but the lower brain is sending these messages that aren't actually true. And if your higher brain, if you don't know this, you're going to feel compelled to act. But once you know this, that these messages aren't true, that they're just a product of habit, they're just automatic, they're just instinctual, they're just primal, then you can gradually learn to, I call it like detach from them. You can learn to let these urges come and go without acting on them. And what you talked about, rewiring the brain and how the mind works, when you don't act on these urges, then the brain learns. It, just as it becomes conditioned to think this habit is necessary, it easily can become conditioned to realize it's not. And it's this well-known concept called neuroplasticity, and it's just that the brain can rewire itself. It can change. So just because I had these faulty neural pathways in my brain at one point in time, I mean, they're gone. And because I stopped acting on them, I stopped following them, and they went away. So that's sort of the short version of how bulimia can be viewed in terms of a healthy brain instead of as a disease. And with that new understanding, I take an approach where the urges are the problem. So I have people focus in on these urges because they're really the only reason that you do what you do. If it wasn't for the urges to binge and feeling compelled to binge, no one would binge, no matter if they were depressed, anxious. I mean, if there was no urge, you just wouldn't do it. So that's the whole sort of premise of my book, is that just teach people how to stop acting on the urges, how to rewire their brain, and then just get back to living a normal life.
I just love hearing you talk. it's like how much I enjoyed reading your book. It was like, speak it, you know. It was like almost like I'm in church or something. I'm like, that's gospel right there. Because you know, when you can sort of, you and I can step out of sort of the cloud or the misunderstanding that is bulimia, that feels like, you know, you're. I mean, you probably did it. I mean, for 20 years it was, this is the last time. Tomorrow, that's the day, and then you freaking do it again, and you're like, what is wrong with me? You know?
Exactly, and it makes you feel crazy. It does.
Yeah, you feel so successful in so many areas of your life. You're doing well in school, or you're doing well in your career, or, you know, life seems to be good. But man, this one little area, you're just hijacked, like you said. And I love that it's just what's going on in your brain. And, you know, and what I think people, and it happened for me, is once I you know, learned much more about it. I didn't know that your book wasn't out when I, you know, went through my recovery, let's say the last year recovery, but I've come to understand that this is what's going on, and it becomes so clear to me. And I love helping people learn what you've shared, because I think it is an alternative to, let's say, the message that's out there. And if we can really hone in, like you've done so clearly in your guide and in your book, it's like, focus on this, not all that other stuff that you want to talk about in there. And, you know, that stuff is great. Like, you know, we don't want to be, you know, having bad relationships or, you know, harming ourselves in other ways or whatever. You know, like, yeah, you want therapy for good reasons, but to stop the binge urge, you know, your two goals, we'll call them, and I think that's what you call them, the goals of recovery, are just so critical to just focus on these. And I want to spend some time talking about them and then sharing, you know, your perspective, my perspective on how those two goals can be achieved, or what we've learned either from doing it or, you know, learning it from people that we've heard about or talked about. So as you said, you know, you mentioned one of them, but two of them. So your two goals in the guide and in your book is dismissing the urges and eating adequately. And all that stuff that you hear about in therapy, you got to cure this past life, or you got to cure this relationship with your mom and stuff, like, let's just really get simple and clear. Two goals: dismiss urges and eat adequately. So let's dive into dismissing urges, because it takes some explanation. And I know in your book, I think in your first book you said it a little bit differently, and then in the second one it's dismissing the urges, because you want to be clear about stopping them, fighting against them, or whatnot, because people need to understand this dance that you have with the urges. Some people call it surfing your urges or surfing your emotions. So tell me what dismissing urges means to you if somebody hasn't read your book.
Yeah, and I called it, in the first book, I said resisting urges, and the word dismissing actually came from Amy Johnson, who is a life coach who actually wrote 3 chapters in the new book, and she just has been working with clients using this method for years now, and she started saying dismissing urges, and she said that it sat so much better with people than resisting, because resisting implies a fight and implies you having to struggle, whereas dismissing is like just not paying attention. It doesn't even deserve any attention whatsoever. So that's really where that word comes from, and just to be clear on that. But yeah, I have basically 5 components of dismissing them, and I'll just jump right into them. The first one is to view the urges as neurological junk. And in therapy, you kind of learn that these urges are meaningful, that you want to binge for a deep reason, that you need it for some emotional fulfillment or comfort or something. And mine is the opposite approach, that you start viewing these urges as junk, as just something your brain is throwing out there. And I could go into the reason why you have the urges just very briefly. As most of the time, it's a survival reaction to dieting. It can also be a habit formation gradually from the repeated overconsumption of like highly stimulating foods, because it can develop without dieting. But in any way it develops, it ends up being a habitual cycle where these urges keep coming up because your brain thinks it's necessary for survival. So because these urges keep popping up, viewing them as meaningful just gives them more power. So I just suggest that people start viewing them as junk from the brain, as something that doesn't even deserve attention, that it's just harmless. I use 3 words: harmless, meaningless, and powerless, because that's kind of what it is, and it describes that. So the second component of dismissing the urges is to separate the true self from the urges to binge. And your true self, as I talked about before, how there's a higher brain and a lower brain, which is like the human brain is the higher brain and the primitive animalistic brain is the lower brain. You separate your true self, your higher brain, from the lower brain. And that means realizing these urges are not you. They're not coming from your true wants, your true desires, what you really want in your life. These are just messages from the lower brain. And the most important part of this step is to realize that you are the one in your higher brain with the control. You are the one only in your higher brain, and more specifically in a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, can control your voluntary actions. So no matter what your lower brain tells you to do, you always, always, always have what I call veto power. You can always say no to it. It cannot do anything to make you act, basically. So when you separate your true self from your urges to binge, you're realizing that your true self has the power over whatever messages are coming from the lower brain, just this junk that's coming up. So the third component is don't react to binge urges, and that means don't let them get you upset. I mean, sometimes it's going to happen anyway, and that's okay, but you just stop fighting them, stop trying to argue back with them, like, if the urges is giving you all these thoughts why you should binge, don't tell it all the thoughts why you shouldn't. I mean, just let it do what it does. The more you feed into it and fight it and argue with it and get frustrated and upset and feel like you have to run from it or distract yourself, the stronger it's going to be. I mean, it just helps to let it come and go as something harmless that's not going to affect you, and that you don't need to get all emotionally react to it. The fourth step is really the cure, which is made possible by the 3 previous steps, and that's to not act on it. And I realized that, without context, it sounds way too simple. Oh, just don't act on your binge urges. And that's why my books are so long, and that's why it takes a lot of background and a lot of explaining. And, in working on the 3 previous steps allows you to not act on these urges. And it's not like you're using willpower, because these are not your true wants. I mean, willpower is when you really, really want something, but you tell yourself you can't have it. This is not something that you want. You don't want this. You want to live a normal life. So you're just learning to ignore this junk from your lower brain and not acting on it. I give like 3, you don't have to do anything really to not act on the urges. It's not like every time you have an urge you have to do something else. But I gave 3 suggestions, and the first is inaction, which just means you just do whatever you were doing in the first place. If you were, emailing and you start having an urge to binge, you just keep doing what you're doing. The other one is to have a list of things you could do. It's called alternative action, and it doesn't mean these alternative actions are going to take the urge away, but it just means you have something to go to and something to occupy yourself just while these urges are coming in your brain, without turning attention to the urges. And the third option for not acting is just still observation, by actually like sitting down and listening to your brain and realizing that these messages are just kind of sound ridiculous when you listen from a detached perspective, from a perspective like, hey, this is not me. They sound just completely different. The 5th component is kind of a bonus. It's to get excited. And every time you have an urge and you don't act on it, and then you feel that freedom, like, oh my gosh, I didn't binge, like get excited. Like, feed into that excitement, because anything you get excited about actually can cement learning. It helps, actually helps brain changes. Like, that's why we praise little kids when they do something good. And it's not just for no reason. It actually helps them learn. And the same with bingers is when you're really happy about what you're doing and what you're accomplishing, it really helps change the areas of the brain that you want changed. So those are really the 5 components. They all work together. In my first book, I called them steps because, I don't know, maybe for lack of a better word. But in this book, I came up with components because they all kind of work together each time you have an urge. So that's my, advice for dismissing urges. And I know you want to share some things too. And really, anything that helps you, I mean, these are 5 components. Anything that helps you do that is wonderful. So I'm not saying this is the only way.
I just want to echo a couple things that, as you were talking, that came up for me. And it was very true for me, and I believe it was true for you, and I hear it from my clients, and that is, that urge can feel like crazy making. So I just want to acknowledge people who are feeling like, no way, like you can't just dismiss this urge. So I just want to say, you know what, you can. It may feel bigger than you, but it isn't. And you've made this really simple and clear for people. But I just want to acknowledge people. Yes, it can feel, but I love how you said that urge can't take over your body. Like it can't get your hand to go pick up that food. It can't drive you to the store. It can coerce you. It can say some really twisted, gnarly thing or whatever, encouraging things or delightful things or like whatever. Just it'll say what you need to hear. And the other thing I was thinking, Kathryn, is, and I really got this when I read your first book, and that is the urge passes. It never lasts forever, and it's sort of like, I don't know why this popped in my mind, but like, if a woman thought that giving birth to a child was going to last the rest of her life, she probably would never give birth. But she knows that she gives birth and the pain passes, right? And then she has a beautiful child, right? Or we think about something that we want to grow into or whatever it is that maybe is a little uncomfortable or difficult at one moment. It passes. You don't have that urge forever. I've heard, people talk about the urge lasts for anywhere from 10 seconds, 15 minutes, or whatever. So like we said, other techniques, just sitting with it, truly just kind of going, thanks for sharing, brain, right? Giving it that space and just knowing that it's not there forever. So if you can believe that, because some people have never been on the other side of a dismissed urge. Like you and I have. It's like we have lived to see the other side and know, oh, that wasn't so bad. Like, yeah, like I won that. And I love what you said about celebrating or, acknowledging it, because that is how the brain learns. The brain, where you put energy on the frustration of, oh, I gave in again, you're just feeding that. You're feeding that. Or you can give energy to, wow, I just missed that urge. Check me out. It's great. And when I was thinking about talking about the urges, so I'll share how I got the concept of neurological junk was at this workshop I was attending, and they helped me understand what some people call the observer concept, right? Which is our highest self, our true self, or whatever you want to call it, the higher brain, is listening to the thoughts. Right? So the way the gentleman said it is, he said, who is that is listening to me? Who is it that's listening to these thoughts? That is your highest self. And you want to remember these little thought bubbles or these neurological junk that come in, they're just thoughts and you don't have to believe them, right? You instead are the listener of your thoughts, right? And they can often sound like your own voice. Sometimes they sound like your mother's voice, so you tend to believe them, but this is where we want to create that distinction is I'm not all my thoughts, right? And, in a lot of the work that I've done, I've learned that negative, defeating, kind of those thoughts that attack you, negative, just like you're not good enough, you're too fat or whatever, that's not higher self thoughts. Those are coming from that neurological jump place. So it's focusing on the ones that do encourage you. I wanted to share just a little bit about the urges too, and helping people in that journey, because for some people it could be quick. If somebody hasn't, either they're really ready for a breakthrough or they haven't had, this condition for very long, it can happen quickly. Other people, it could go on for weeks, months, who knows? It depends on when you're ready. So it's like, prepare for this journey. What I find for my clients that have success when they start doing this is they're ready. They're prepared and they do their best to know what's ahead, but they don't know it all. But they're I'll liken it a little bit. I'm training for a race right now, and I've trained for other ones in the past, and I did this kind of difficult race last year that it required a lot of agility. I did a Tough Mudder and Spartan races last year, and it required a lot more physique and physical, stamina than I had before. I was a runner, but I was never someone that could lift this weight and jump over this fence, this wall and stuff. But I set it out there as a goal, and I didn't know exactly what training would totally look like. I didn't know what the race would look like, but I knew I wanted it, and I was in pursuit of being a Spartan, in pursuit of being a Tough Mudder. And so as I prepared, I knew that there was going to be long training, days of training and sore muscles, and, I might get some injuries or, along the way. But I was in it, and I didn't give up. And I knew that the result would be, having completed those races, and I did. And so some of the things when it comes to dismissing the urges and that change and those transformations that will take place during there is, your body's going to go through some changes. And I understand that, that initial bloating, the digestive system kind of goes into some weird places. It might be a little bit of weight gain, which will balance out when your metabolism catches up. The other thing is, I'm such a big believer of visualization, and this, I'm sure you've written about it, and, the brain doesn't know the difference between something we close our eyes and imagine and that which is really happening. So if you can spend time visualizing yourself as a recovered person, how would the person I want to be, a recovered bulimic or binge eater, how would that person live their life? Just imagine things. How would they eat? And maybe it won't all be clear, but spending time in visualization, I think, is a great technique. Pack and prepare for the trip is one of the things I wrote down as a little note, and it's having enough food around, never letting yourself get overly hungry. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And also setting up your environment for success. I don't know if you've experienced any of this, or you talk to the people that contact you, but if you've got people that don't support you, or a fridge full of food that that will trigger your binge, just get that stuff out of there, right? Right? Yeah.
Are you asking me? I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah. No, please. I think the environment that we surround ourselves both with people and stuff has something to do with this as well.
Yeah, it can definitely help. I really think that's an individual thing, because you don't want to make people feel like they have to get all the binge food out of the house, because ultimately you want to be able to be around any type of food. You want to be able to know that you have control. But some people aren't ready for that yet, and that's okay. People shouldn't feel guilty for needing to get the tempting food out the house for a little while. They shouldn't feel guilty about that. They shouldn't feel guilty if they need to, any change that anyone needs to make to the environment to help make dismissing urges doable is great. And it's such an individual thing, and I think that, you're right on there.
Absolutely, and I love what you said. It's an individual thing. There's no two recoveries that look exactly the same. There's no two, they're never the same length or anything like that. It happens to be that, ours were 10 years ago, but how you did it and how I did it may look very different. And so, find what works for you. And the last thing, I really think, this ties in with that celebrating your wins is forgive yourself quickly. So there may be times when you're trying to dismiss urges and you don't, right? Or you overeat a little bit and you're like, oh, and the more time you spend beating yourself up or, shaming yourself for I didn't do it right or anything like that, that's just giving energy in the wrong direction. So I say forgive quickly and then celebrate your wins. So focus on what is working. So, I want to talk next. Is there anything else that you wanted to share about dismissing urges? Do you feel like we've kind of touched upon everything? I think that was great.
Yeah, I think that was really great. Yes.
Okay. I want to go into. Let's talk a little bit about the second goal, and it comes up in your book second, but it kind of is the first goal. So for bulimics who are maybe restricting themselves, they haven't come into balance with normal eating adequately, your second goal for recovery, that's the first step, right? Can you say, or help us understand why you recommend that?
Yeah, it was a kind of a challenge to figure out what to put first or second. And I wanted people to have the knowledge of how to dismiss urges first, but I warned several times in the book that, hey, if you're still restricting, you're probably not going to be able to dismiss the urges right now. So just read through it, and then more information will be for you in the next part of the book, in the Eating Adequately section. Because if you are starving yourself, if you're not getting enough calories, your primitive brain is going to be on a mission to drive you to eat. The body is amazing. That we're wired so that if there's a famine, this is an ancient survival instinct in our brain, that if there isn't enough food, our brain becomes focused on getting us enough food, and our cravings increase. There's just this whole host of hormonal changes that take place that slow our metabolism, and that just really focus on, us getting food. And that's why so many diets fail. That's why, if you diet, you probably know that it has the opposite effect on what you intend. You want to learn to eat less, and it makes you want to eat more. So if you're dieting, it's really going to be hard to dismiss the urges because you're hungry, and that's, a basic need that needs to be filled. And also what dieting does, our brain has, and our body and our brain have limited resources. So it kind of gives resources to the functions it deems most important. And when you're dieting, your most important function is going to be your lower brain, your primitive brain, to drive to you to get food. And it takes away sort of those self-control functions. Anyone who's ever been hungry knows that you have less self-control when you're hungry. So it's really going to be hard to dismiss urges when you're not eating adequately. So although it comes second, some people don't start dismissing urges until after they're eating adequately. Does that make sense?
Yes. Totally. And, I have found that I have more of my clients who also aren't sleeping adequately. Mm-hmm. And I think there's some, you said, it's not necessarily willpower that we're talking about here, but, man, you are just at there's research out there about how addiction can be improved, or keeping with addiction recovery. This was studies that were done about alcoholics and drugs. They talked about when people sleep more, they can sustain their recovery longer, or they can be recovered. So I'm not saying that that's in your book, but I just wanted to add that some of my clients sometimes need to look at their sleep in addition to their eating. So that's just the two things to consider. So, I think for both of us, we had right before, let's say, our lasting recovery moment, or when we kind of got on this final step of being in lasting recovery, we were both kind of eating normally and binging on top of it. So it wasn't like, there might have been some back and forth, and maybe we had days that looked differently, but in a lot of cases, for me anyway, I was living a pretty normal eating life, or what seemed like a normal eating life, sustaining weight and stuff like that, and then, triggered moments and having binges in between. How can normal eating habits be implemented for someone who is pretty out of whack. I think you've talked about 4 strategies. How do people get started on normal eating habits if they don't know? I get a lot of people that are like, I'm not sure that I should eat. How do I do it? What do you recommend, or what have you seen? Where do you point people?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And you're right that I was basically eating normally. But at the time I stopped binging, really the only goal I needed was the dismissing urges because I was eating enough. Now, I wasn't for years before that because dieting got me into the whole mess to begin with. But I eventually learned that I couldn't diet anymore. I knew it was part of the problem, and it just, anytime I even tried to restrict calories, I would binge. So I was eating normally by the time I stopped binging. But just eating normally wasn't enough. Like for some people who maybe have just started dieting, and start to binge, then maybe implementing normal eating habits might be all they need because it'll turn off that survival instinct. But for most people who are seeking recovery, it's already become a habit. So once it becomes a habit, even if you start to eat normally, you're probably still going to binge on top of it. Hopefully that makes some sense. But to get back to your question about how to implement it, I do talk about 4 strategies, which I'll talk about in a minute. But basically, all you're trying to do is get acceptable quality food and acceptable quantity. I think quantity is actually more important when you're recovering from binge eating because you want to really make sure that you're not depriving yourself of calories, that you're really giving yourself the best chance to be able to dismiss these urges. And I know that this can be hard for people who are used to restricting calories to try to lose weight. But I really think, and I explain a lot in my books, of how ineffective this is. It's just ineffective. It's to not give your body what it needs to try to lose weight. It's just a losing battle. It's something that you can't keep up long term. Even if it works in the short term, it damages your metabolism, which can be repaired and normalized. So you didn't, mess anything up there. But it's just not a good strategy to lose weight. And if let's say you're restricting food, and you're binge eating on top of binge eating and restricting food, you're probably still getting more calories than a normal diet. So just to convince people that, hey, if you stop restricting and you stop binging, you're probably going to be eating less than you are now with restricting and binge eating. It's just kind of mathematical. But so to get started, some people don't need a lot of guidance. Some people can just kind of, they have a lot of knowledge of what a normal diet looks like, or they can look to family and friends, or they can just kind of go on what they know and what feels right for them. Other people need a little more guidance. So there are 4 strategies are planned eating, which can also be called structured eating. And that's really a big part of cognitive behavioral therapy and a lot of programs that tell you to create a meal plan, to, research what you need with the help of a nutritionist or just your own research, figure out what you need and create basically 3 planned meals a day with, 3 snacks, 2 or 3 snacks. And, follow that plan and don't let yourself get too hungry, eat every 2 to 3 hours. And, there's more information about this. That's just the basic approach. The second method is the servings-based method. And that's for people who really don't want to plan things very detailed, just for people to know basically how many servings they need of there's 6 different categories, like proteins, fats, carbohydrates, fruits, dairy, vegetables, and then also some sweets or desserts. But basically how many of each one do you need? So you can sort of go throughout your day and pick and choose and put things together based on what you have, and it's more flexibility. The third method is really the calorie minimum eating, and I think that's really important for people who just really want to really make sure that they're getting enough. And it does involve counting calories, which is some controversy, but it's not counting calories to lose weight. It's counting calories in a way that cares for yourself, that is, just trying to make sure you're giving your body what it needs. So you sort of set a minimum number, and I recommend in my book a minimum of 2,200 calories. And this is all explained, and it sounds like a lot to people who diet, but it's not. It's not a lot, and there's been research that shows that bulimics and even normal women are needing about 2,400 calories a day. And I explain the science behind that, and everyone's individual. So anything I say is not, okay, that's set in stone, you have to eat this many calories a day, but just as a recommendation, as a guideline. So you don't have to count your calories exactly, but just basically making sure that you're hitting your number on average over the course of days or weeks. The last strategy is intuition-based eating, and this is basically intuitive eating. And most people know about intuitive eating, and it's sort of everyone's eventual goal to be able to eat intuitively, which means eat based on hunger and fullness, but also based on what makes you feel good, not just what tastes good in the moment, which is great too, but what makes you feel good, what fuels your activities, what fits your lifestyle. And that's really for people who are more advanced, who really kind of are more in touch with their body, whereas a lot of bulimics aren't and need some structure up front and then gradually transition to intuition-based eating or intuitive eating. So those are just 4 basic strategies, and they're all aimed at really getting you an adequate quantity of food and adequate quality food. And no one's going to do those things in the same way. No one's diet's going to look exactly alike. And I think really having this mindset that you have to eat perfectly and have to have all the right things at the right times really is a losing battle. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're just going for overall enough food for your body.
Totally. And I think I would echo that and say it's evolving. I think what we need as 20-year-olds changes to what we need as 40-year-olds or 60-year-olds. So don't look at it necessarily like something you have to work on, the rest of your life, but it can evolve. So, how I look at this phase of, the eating adequately phase that you rebalance things is you're kind of going into an experiment. You get in and you're experimenting with yourself, with different foods, with what works, with what doesn't work. And I love to work with my clients and trying to trust their own intuition to guide them to, well, I think structured eating would work for me, or I think I should try, measuring or calorie-based or what have you. So let them indicate where to start, right? And then experiment with it and, try and learn or fail and learn, but keep evolving it until you get to that balanced place where you feel confident, like, okay, I understand normalized eating for me and my life, because, if you don't know what normal looks like, then start learning. Like you said, talk to family and friends or go on the internet and see what resonates for you. See what sounds like, okay, that makes sense or that sounds good, and then try it out. Try it out for a week or two. And really, I want to emphasize that you're putting time in to get this dialed in, right? It's a phase that you go through, or you start. Like I love how you said, just you put the dismissing urges in the beginning of the book so people will understand it, so that when they feel, ready or they want to give it a try, they can while they're going through the eating adequately phase. But in that phase, it's like, let's get this dialed in and make it a goal to try and experiment until you have balance and you feel good consistently. And I'll just kind of add to that, like you said, there's no one that works for everyone. It's lifestyle choices. So a student has different needs, both, from a time perspective, a calorie perspective, a convenience perspective, than a busy mom or a workaholic. Like each one of them has different things that fit into their budget requirements, their values, all sorts of things. So really dial it in this phase and experiment and try and see. And some of what I work with my clients on is to consider journaling. Did you ever do journaling when you're doing it? I think you came to adequate eating or balanced eating without needing that. I don't remember.
I used to use a lot of journaling in therapy, and I used it in a way that, it wasn't effective for me because it was all based on figuring out what the urge was about, like a deeper meaning. Like, so if I had an urge, I never could figure this out till afterward, and it was like, okay, so I had an urge because I had this stressful thing happen to me, and this is why I think I binged, and none of it, the way I see things now, none of it was true. It was because I had a primal instinct because I was dieting or because I had a habit wired into my brain. So a lot of it for me wasn't productive, but I think it can be used in a productive way with people who are trying to recover, just in trying to figure out what, insights along the way help them dismiss urges, what works for them, focusing on their success. And that's why a lot of the second book has a lot of workbook elements, because it helps you get your thoughts down and what works for you and focusing on the things that are going to move you forward.
Absolutely. And, I'll give you an example, from my life. So right now I'm, like I said, in training, and for this race that I'm running, it's a longer race. It's more of an endurance race than I've done before. And I wanted to be sure that my nutrition would sustain me, right? I'm also, I happen to be a vegan, so, I get protein from different sources than people get them from animals. So working with a nutrition coach was helping me understand, am I getting enough, for the amount of exercise that I'm doing? Can I sustain? Because my goal was not to do a lot of goos and sugary substances and stuff, but do it a little more healthful way. So my journaling looks like, for example, I write down as I go through the day what I'm eating. I am an intuitive eater, but how I journal is if I notice that I get overly full, or if I get tired, or I have a really bad recovery from a workout or something like that, it helps me see, what may have contributed to that, because, calories in leads to energy out. So there is a very direct correlation. So that's one way. And, with clients, they can, for some of the clients that I work with, that maybe they are doing a structured eating plan, and as they go through their day, and they say, oh, well, I ate more than I intended to. And I said, well, were you hungry? At that time, they were journaling and saying, I was hungry. I noticed hunger. It helps them, really pinpoint. It didn't come from some, neurological junk. It's a physical reaction to being hungry. So it helps them, keep track of that and maybe look at in the future, this day had, because each day is different. Our calorie demands are different. So, one day might have less physical activity, one day might have more. So we need to adjust it, if you will. And so journaling can help in that way. But it doesn't work for everyone. It's not necessarily necessary for everyone. Some people like it. Same with working with a nutritionist. I've had clients that have success and some that don't. So it's like anything. It's try it. Experiment and see what works for you. So. But I think we both would agree that the goal is to, get to a more balanced place. You can try, like you said, dismissing urges as you're working on it. But the goal is you got to get out of that starvation mode. You got to get out of that diet mindset and get into a more normal pattern for those kind of panicky hunger urges, animal instinct survival urges, to not be a part of the conversation or not often come up, right? So. Yeah,
and the fact that I recommend, more than 2,000 calories, some people are like, I can't eat that much, and I'm going to gain weight. I'm like, but what is now? You're, like I said before, you're getting more calories now, even if you're purging right after. I mean, studies have shown that like up to 75% of calories, it's like maybe 50 to 75% can still be absorbed, even if you purge right after. So you're actually getting less. And it's sort of an insurance policy. Like, just make sure you're getting enough. At some point, if you feel like it's too much, then decrease it a little bit and see what happens. But, give yourself a chance to dismiss the urges. Don't try to think that you can starve yourself and dismiss the urges. It's just a losing battle. It's just going to lead to frustration. It's not going to work. And it's not going to give your metabolism a chance to regulate. I mean, once you start eating adequately and feeding your hunger, your body's going to use the energy. It's going to start working the way it should, and you're going to be able to maintain your weight and be at your weight that's best for your body. It doesn't mean it's going to be the exact weight that you want, but just it's just a losing battle to try to be a weight that you're not genetically. And we all have this sort of set range, and we have to live with it. And it is what it is. And trying to live outside of your set range is just not. It's not worth it.
Yeah, that's one battle that just giving energy to that, for the rest of your life. I mean, really? So. Yeah,
and nobody. I mean, that's why diets are such a miserable failure, because nobody can do it, because our brains don't work that way. I mean, the only thing that's going to give you a chance to. I'm not saying you have to give up on fitness or health. I mean, you're talking about these amazing fitness things that you're doing. It not dieting doesn't mean you just be lazy all the time. You can still be fit. You can still eat healthy. But you're just not starving yourself. You're not being overly rigid and giving yourself these rules that you have to follow. You're just listening to your body.
Absolutely. And I have definitely clients that I've talked to. We had the conversation of towards the end of it. There's different times of day I find with my clients. Let's say an urge will get louder or whatever, and it often comes from like a hungry phase. They go from a transition. Maybe a student gets out of school and they haven't enough calories. They've been sitting and their brain's just been cranking, and they're hungry. And then it's like, it starts to get louder, and then there's maybe the transition time at night, like they haven't eaten enough during the day, and then that rebellious side wants to, maybe they're following their structured plan very, very properly and everything's great, and then sort of this rebellious voice from who knows where they feel like comes up and says, I can just have this, or we deserve it and whatnot. And really it's working, to eat consistently and mindfully throughout the day so that, we're not fighting those. And a lot of it comes to preparing, like thinking in advance, oh gosh, I'm going to have this, for one, I learned this a lot as a vegan, I have things with me because not everywhere I go is there something to just quickly grab. So I'll prepare for myself. I'll have some sort of bar that I can eat in the car, or I'll eat in advance of going out with some people just to make sure that I don't put myself in that place where I'm depleted and I can't reach for something, or want to reach for something that doesn't feel good. So, well, I think we've done a great job. Thank you, Kathryn, for sharing all of that. Your book is fantastic, and what I'd like to do is kind of wrap things up. And I've enjoyed this conversation. I hope people who've been on this have as well. And just by saying, attitude has a lot to do with recovery, right? And going in with the right mindset and the right attitude that, like I said, when I put out there one of my goals last year to, let's say, run a Tough Mudder or Spartan race, if I had the attitude like, boy, I sure hope this works, or I'll never get there, like, why even sign up, right? Like, don't go there right now. Like, come at it again. Come at it at a different time, or maybe look for some inspiration. Find stories of people who were on the couch. For me, for example, people that were on the couch and they ran a Spartan in 6 months or something like that, and how they did it. Like, wow, people can do this. So whatever it takes for each of us to get the attitude of hope and faith and like belief, like, wow, maybe I can have this. And I've received email after email in the past. People sometimes contact me because after 20 years with it, that's kind of a long time. People look at that like, wow, you had it for 20 years. And I've had people contact me who've had it for 30 years or 40 years. And my message is always, you created this and you can change it. Right? Some people, we often forget. You and I know now where those associations in the brain and how the wiring happens. It's not necessarily that we have to go back to that point and figure out, how did I create this, or why did I do this to myself? Why would I have done this? It doesn't matter. But just know the power lies within you, and you can create it. So even if you've had it for 4 years or 40 years, it's simple. It's simple. It's the process that you've gone through here, the eating adequately, getting to a normalized place with your nutrition so you don't have that starvation mode going on in your body, and then dismissing the urges. And there's techniques in your book, and your guide is fantastic for helping people walk through that process. But you have to believe that you can do it. And getting to that point, walking into this, and whether you work with a coach or someone to help you, the people that I see that have success, they come to a place where they decide that they want it, and they're going to do what it takes to get there. And their attitude is, I think I can do this. It may be hard. I don't know how long it's going to take, whatever the language is on how they do it, but they start moving in that direction. They start taking steps, and they're committed to it, not like, I'll give this a go, but boy, it's never worked in the past. That's not the attitude that will get you there. It's about building that momentum and staying the course, because those urges, I've heard people who give up smoking. It's like the urge to smoke will still be there long after you put the cigarette down. So, the dismissing the urges will continue for a while, and how long is really up to your body and your, anatomy, I would say. You just have to stay that course and be in it. And as we wrap up, I just want to create an invitation, if you're listening to this, and thank you for sitting through and listening to everything that Kathryn said and I've said. I hope you got some things out of this that you can take into your life. So as you reflect back, and maybe you've taken some notes, think about what is the one thing that you can do this week, make a decision, and take action on something that you've heard. Just one thing, one little nugget, one little thing that you're going to try in your life, and go do it. Don't listen to this, turn this off, and not do something. So I pray for you that you will take that action and do that thing. So if you write that down in this moment. I want to take one last moment as we close and say thank you, Kathryn, for joining me in this conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, too. I really enjoyed being here as well.
Thank you. And anyone who is interested in Kathryn's original book, Brain Over Binge, or her latest book, Brain Over Binge Recovery Guide, you can easily get them on Amazon. I'll have links to them. If you're reading this through my blog or on Kathryn's site, they're available on Amazon and most e-reader programs. So you've got access to it, and it's fantastic. I hope you'll reach out and get it. And then, as an invitation, if recovery coaching is something that you're interested in or you want to have a conversation about, I do offer 30-minute complimentary consultations on my website. You can check that out at getbusythriving.com. Maybe it's something that will help support you in this process. And if so, then I hope you'll reach out to me and contact me. And Kathryn, thank you again, and wishing you the best. And come out with some more. Let's keep doing this. This is fun.
Yeah. Bye, Polly.
Bye-bye.